Hello and welcome to Sensitive Changemakers, the podcast where we celebrate the power of sensitivity and introversion in leadership, entrepreneurship and beyond. I'm Kate Carter, your host, a certified professional coach, HSP and introvert who's passionate about helping you embrace your unique gifts and lead with authenticity. Let's dive in. Hello, I hope this episode finds you well. This particular episode is a replay of one of my masterclasses, and I wanted to share it more widely here because it went down so well in my little community. Because what I did is, for the first time ever, I broke down how I worked with a client to support her from feeling frustrated to being ghosted to having her first $4,330 month. And I wanted to give the nuance, I wanted to give the context, I wanted to break it down so that you could see what we worked on together and how she got to where she got. I really hope this is supportive and that you get a lot from it. I would love to hear your takeaways. And if there is anything else you really would like to know, if there's any questions you have, please do ask. Please do enjoy. And yeah, reach out and let me know what you've taken from it. I'm really excited to delve into this with you. This is all about the case study. And this is the first time I've done a case study. So I'd love your feedback as to whether this is helpful and anything else that you would like me to kind of dig into. So this is a client and I'm going to break it down into mindset, clarity and strategy. Those are the three kind of lenses that I generally support my clients with anyway. And I'm also going to give you context as to the situation when we first started working together, because I think a lot of us hear about the results, which are great, but we don't often hear about the kind of work or the context or what that person was bringing to the initial kind of sessions and things like that. So I want to break all of that down for you. So let's get started, and I'm going to make sure that I have got the comments up just in case anybody has got any questions. Please do ask. So this is a client that I worked with, and she went from feeling incredibly frustrated to having her first kind of $4,330 month, I think it was in the end. And I'm going to talk you through the journey. So when we first started working together, she was feeling very frustrated because and this goes for so many of my clients, if not all of them, they are so hardworking, really hardworking, and they are not afraid to put the work in. They're not afraid to do the kind of outreach or putting themselves into situations that maybe they haven't put themselves in before. Obviously, everything that I say here goes without saying that this is within integrity and it is in alignment with what they want as well. But this particular lady, she was honestly working so hard. I mean, one of the things that we actually did was try to reduce what she was doing because there was so many different things she was doing. But what she was having, she was getting on calls. She had a strategy. So this is the context that I want to kind of start this with. She had a strategy. There were things that were working. Okay. She had success before. And what she was finding was that the people that she was talking to were ghosting her once she'd had the initial conversation with them. And she had quite a few kind of what I consider more traditional bro marketing kind of strategies. Nothing wrong with them, but that is what she was kind of using to kind of sell. And that is something that we looked at, and we looked at how we could support her to feel better about being on calls and things like that, if that is something she wanted to do. So that is the context. She had a strategy. She had some success before, but she was finding that the people that she was getting onto calls with were kind of just ghosting her and just saying that they weren't interested. And so she was starting to, as with most of us, I think we do this, starting to internalize that kind of rejection, if you like, and see it as there's something wrong with me. And that's kind of the initial conversation that we were having. So I'm going to get my notes up, and as you know, I just want to make sure that I cover everything. Okay, she did do outreach a lot. So this is something I've actually come across with quite a lot of clients. It's not something I do, but I know that it has been taught, and I think it's obviously worked for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. But I think for most introverts and highly sensitives, I don't think it's necessarily the best way to approach this, but I still see it. And that is where just DM as many different people as possible. And this outreach was exhausting her. And I think it goes for most of the people I talk about. Unless there's a strategy behind it, just doing that outreach is exhausting and it is draining, and then it feels frustrating because you're not getting the kind of feedback from that as well. You're not getting that conversation, you're not getting that connection. And so that was one thing she was doing that she was feeling really frustrated around. And she did a lot of networking events as well, so there was a lot of push and hustle for her to be seen, to be doing, to be pushing her business forward. So there, and it came from a really good place because she really, really wanted this to work. And so she was not afraid, like I said, to be there, to do the things, to put herself out there. But she was feeling it absolutely exhausting her and draining her. And then, like I said, she was starting to internalize some of that feedback into, this must mean that I'm rubbish at what I do. Okay. So the first thing she did, and again, this is a kind of added context, is the way that I work, and I know that most of you know this, is that I have Basecamp and that I have the sessions. And the Basecamp is there for my clients to use as and whenever they want to. And I have boundaries around that so that I'm not on there all of the time and draining myself out. But they can use that. And she used it to the maximum, which was lovely and beautiful. So we were having a lot of conversations in between sessions as well as the sessions themselves. So I wanted to add that context because I know I speak from experience here as a client. I'm working with a coach, that it was very much like, oh, I don't want to, don't want to get on their nerves, don't want to frustrate them, or they're really busy, I don't want to add something to their plate. That's what that container is for. That's what we're here to do as coaches. So that was something that she really utilized to the maximum. And so there was so much, we were able to do so much more work together in a shorter amount of time than we would do if we just relied on sessions. So I just wanted to add that in there as well. Okay, mindset. So we'll go through mindset first. So the first thing we really did was we discussed her values and her priorities and her big why. So that, and I know that if you've followed me for quite a while, I love doing this anyway. But I think it's such an important part, just as human beings, but as introverts and highly sensitives, I do think having that lens to see everything through is so important. So what were her values, her priorities, and her big why? So that every time we came to making a decision, every time we came to a crossroads, we could always come back to that and look at it through that lens. And that's how we kind of created a more streamlined strategy for her, and how we actually got really clear on what was important for her. So our first session together, I still remember it now, I was mirroring back to her that I could really see a lot of self-doubt. And this wasn't to say that she wasn't good at what she does. I think she's amazing at what she does. But there was a lot of self-doubt for whatever reason, and we kind of break that down. I'm not going to go into too much around the reasons for that, but there was self-doubt. She also did a lot of mind reading. And what I mean by this is, instead of asking questions or finding out the facts, and we're all guilty of this, there's no blame here, I know that I'm guilty of it myself, but instead of finding out those facts, instead of finding out or asking those questions, she assumed she knew what the other person was thinking. And sometimes this actually stopped the momentum and moving her forward, because she assumed that the person, I don't know, for example, couldn't afford it, or she assumed the person didn't want to work with her, or she assumed, etc. So there was a lot of kind of assumptions based on that mind reading. And again, that is a cognitive distortion that we all have in varying degrees. And it'd be just interesting for you to, I can think about the amount of times that I've done this, but just actually reflecting on, does this come up for me? Do I do that? Do I fall into that mind reading kind of trap of not asking the question, of not finding out the details, because I just assume that X, Y, and Z, whatever you're assuming. And then the other thing that came up was some people-pleasing tendencies. And again, this came from wanting to do a really good job. Again, it comes from a good place, really wanting to do a good job, going above and beyond. And this is what I see so much in my clients is they are really heart-centered, and I get their frustration because they do go above and beyond, and yet they're seeing other people in the online space who may not be going above and beyond, may be charging more, for example, and thinking, well, I know that I'm working harder and putting more into my business than that. So where are my kind of clients? Where's my that kind of consistency? So I do understand that frustration. So there were those people pleasing tendencies as well. And we kind of I mirrored that back to her. And this is what I do a lot in sessions is I say, it's interesting. This is what I'm seeing as you're talking through, and really picking up underneath what's being said to what the crux of what is really happening. And so a lot of these things she was doing were really showing in the action she was taking in business. So she was giving a lot away of things for free, which is absolutely fine. You know that I love giving away things for free. I do it myself a lot. But it was coming from a place where she thought that that's what she had to do. And then when she was doing that, she was starting to resent the fact that she was giving these things away for free. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So it came from a place of, I think I have to do this in order to get them interested, in order to get clients, etc. But then as she was doing it, she was ending up resenting that. So the first thing we kind of worked through was normalizing wanting and desiring money, because that was one of the things I think it wasn't necessarily holding her back, but it was one of the areas where there was a bit of doubt. Who am I to want that money? Who am I to ask or to charge that amount? Are people really going to be able to afford it? And then goes a bit deeper. Am I really good enough to want to have that? Does that make sense? So a lot of what we did to start off with was normalizing that desire and want, which I think is such an important part of being highly sensitive. I do think that as highly sensitives, and I do think it goes over a little bit with introverts as well, but definitely with highly sensitives, there is this wanting to work for a deeper meaning. And that's beautiful. Absolutely, I think that's a big why for a lot of us. But actually, what we're doing is a lot of us do want, if we're completely honest, we do want the money. Not necessarily for having money for money's sake, but because of what money represents. Money represents stability. Money represents safety. And so we want that, but we don't want to look like we want that. And so we pull away from that, saying we want a business with meaning. And what I really want to kind of just show to you is that it can be this and rather than this or. So it's not like you have to choose between two. You can absolutely have a business that has a deeper meaning for you and still want to have money, still want to have an income in, so that you have that stability and safety, which is what money means to a lot of us. Again, money itself is neutral, but we put a lot of meaning onto money. And for a lot of us, money means stability and safety. And so what we did to start off with was really normalizing that that's what she wanted, and that that was okay, and that she could still have a business where she worked hard and where she was in integrity and where she was in alignment with her values and her priorities, and still want the money at the end of the day. So that was one thing we did. We talked about that it's not an either or situation, it can be an and situation. And we looked at how we could create safety with money. And one of the ways that we talked about doing this was like putting money aside each month, like a savings account, but it was money she was saving to reinvest in her business. So it might be that she was saving her money to invest in a VA, or she was saving her money to reinvest into coaching, or she was saving her money to whatever, but she started to put money aside to create that safety bubble so that she could actually use it to reinvest in her business. And that in itself not only supports her in creating safety, it's a very actionable thing to do, but it also makes your business more real as well, because this is important to me. It's not just a hobby. I'm actually putting money aside each month to reinvest in my business, because I know that's how businesses work. So those were the kind of things that we talked about in terms of money. And there were quite a few mindset parts to this. And so the second thing I did, which I do for a lot of my clients, is I recorded a personal and private kind of meditation. So this was about embodying the version of herself who had her version of success. And this again was created to help with that safety around money, but it was also geared towards deepening her self-trust. Because something I see with a lot of clients is that they can see the future they want, they can see the success, but there's still a gap. It's like it's happening to somebody else or it's happening to them in the future. And so it always is a future plan rather than something that is changing and happening now. So what we were doing was we were working on embodying parts of that person now in very actionable ways, not necessarily in woo-woo ways, but in very actionable ways. So like putting the money aside each month, creating boundaries, which we'll talk about later, making decisions as though that you're that person now, okay? And then with that regular listening of that meditation's help, it really helped her to lean into that version of herself more and more until she started to actually see that it was her reality. So there was an element of inner work here, that mindset, that kind of just listening to the meditation, actually started to believe it about yourself. But there were some actionable steps that we put into place as well, like I said, around the money, around boundaries, around actually starting to take action as though you were that person now. So the meditation is something I love doing. The mind reading piece, so I want to go up into this in a little bit more detail because it comes up for a lot of clients. And this is normally assumptions that we have about people that we're meeting that are potential clients. And there are assumptions around like pricing or being liked, things like that. And this showed up in her business by pulling back from asking questions, especially to those people who had reached out to her to ask her something about her services. So we worked on this a lot throughout our time and we got really curious because that's my kind of perspective on everything. So no judgment, just curiosity around the situations that this was popping up for her in, and to start to pattern interrupt it by saying to herself, oh look, I'm mind reading again. I don't actually know what's going on in their head. Let me ask them instead. So this then led into normalizing taking the action that she had originally wanted to take, which most of the time for this particular client was asking those questions. So we would work on this together and she would start to pattern interrupt when she found herself mind reading, just by saying something like, oh look, I'm mind reading again. I don't actually know what that person wants. Let me ask instead. And just by asking that, she always came back quite a few times and always said, oh, it wasn't as bad as what I thought. Or most of the time it was something even better than what she'd assumed. So she was going in with kind of a negative bias, which again is one of those cognitive biases. We all have a negative bias. We all generally, and obviously we're all on a scale as to how often this happens to us, but we all have that where we just assume the worst, or we just think that the negative thing's going to happen. And so she was going into this with that kind of mindset. And then what happened was she would ask the question because we would talk about it in sessions, and then she would actually get a more positive answer than she originally thought she was going to. And then that led to her building up evidence. So this is something else I do with a lot of clients, where I'm like, let's build up the evidence to counterbalance this negative bias that you have. So we had negative bias here, which in her, in her kind of life was coming up as mind reading in this particular case. And then we were creating or building that evidence that actually counterbalanced that. Look, you asked that question. You didn't rely on your mind reading skills. You actually asked the question and look at the positive things that you've got from that. Look at what you've learned from that. Look at the resources you've got as a result of you asking that question. So we started to create evidence, and I find this such a powerful one. It's something I use from CBT. I don't follow just one way in terms of supporting thought work, but I do love this particular piece of CBT because I think it's a lovely conscious way of building up evidence against our negative bias, whatever that comes up for us. So having this building evidence was a wonderful way for her to start to actually see that she could ask questions, and for her to start to believe in herself more. So that self-doubt, not only did it counterbalance the mind reading, but it counterbalanced that self-doubt that she was having as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on to people pleasing. So again, really common for so many of us as introverts and highly sensitives, I think. This showed up in her business, in this particular client, by looking for external validation. And I think so many of us can really relate to this. we are brought up in a society that praises this external validation all of the time, that expects us to have people to tell us we're doing a good job. You know, it comes all the way from school, all the way through work. It is just built into our society. And so, of course, when we start our business, we're going to be looking for that external validation there as well. But business, as we know, is slightly different. And we need to work on how we can inner validate things rather than looking for external validation. External validation is still lovely, like I'm not dissing it completely, but in order to kind of to believe in ourselves more and to have that stable foundation for us as business owners, I think cultivating that internal validation is such an important part of this. So we did, every time a decision needed to be made, and I'm just going to go through this a little bit more detail, it was important that I asked her what she thought was the right thing to do for her and her business. Because what she sometimes did is, and again, no blame here because I've done this myself and I'm sure you guys can resonate as well. And I'm not even sure whether sometimes it was on a conscious level. It became conscious because we brought it up in sessions, but I know for a lot of us, it's not even something we're consciously doing. But what would happen is there would be a decision that needed to be made in her business, and she would often think about what would be best for the other person rather than her and her business. And again, I think this comes from a lovely, lovely place, but it wasn't serving her and her business because these people that she was trying to please weren't even clients yet. And so they may have not even been right fit clients. And I'm going to go over that in a minute because I think a lot of them weren't. So she was trying to people please and trying to please potential clients that actually weren't a right fit for her in the first place. So what we did is we kind of backtracked and we looked at it through that lens of her values and her priorities and her. So what is the right decision for you as a business owner, as a person who prioritizes these things? What is your priority here? What is your decision, rather than giving your power away to somebody else who isn't necessarily going to be a right fit? I hope that makes sense. She did say to me at one point, I wish you would just tell me what to do. And I get this, I really do. And I think I was having an interesting conversation with somebody else around this. I think being able to understand that a lot of people, when they start out in business, and I'm talking as somebody who supports people with businesses and leadership, when you start out as particularly in a business, you are looking for the things to be done. What do I need in order to start my business? You don't realize at the very start, unless you've got previous experience, that it's going to be such an inner journey, that there's going to be so much mindset and energy pieces to it. You just think it's all about action. I just need to put these pieces of puzzle into place and it's all going to be great. And so marketers who are marketing to these type of people know that, and so they give really clear things to do. Just do X, Y, and Z. Just do this, this, and this, and you'll be fine. And those types of people are absolutely needed. I'm not dissing it at all, but they are more consultants and they are more mentors. I'd say consultants, definitely. It does kind of veer over to mentorship a little bit, but they're not coaches. Okay, that is, you know, if you've done your coaching training, you know that is not a coach. That is much more of a consultant and a mentor. So one of the things that I feel so strongly about, which is why I'm a coach and a mentor, coach first, but I don't do consultancy. But one of the reasons I do coaching is because I want to empower the person in front of me to know that they have the answers already inside them. And yes, if there's something that they don't know and they don't have the knowledge about, yes, that's when my mentor skills come in. But it isn't to say that I have all of the answers for every single client, because I don't, but I know my clients do. And this is where we ask the question, or I ask the question, what is best for you in terms of your values and your priorities, rather than saying just do X, Y, and Z. And I can see how it can feel when you're on the other side, just tell me what to do. And this was where it was coming from. But I know that if I told her what to do, all I'm doing, if I keep doing that over and over, knowing what I knew when we first started to work together, and those self-doubts that were coming up, that mind reading piece that was coming up, those people pleasing tendencies, that looking for external validation, if I told her what to do using my mentor kind of skills, all I would be doing was enabling that side of her. I would be further adding that self-doubt to her, because she'd always feel like she had to rely on me or somebody else for her answers or for what she needed to do next. And I wanted her to feel empowered, that she knew the answers, that she could figure out what the particular action that she needed to take. Okay, so I hope that kind of makes sense. So one of the things that we did here is I wanted, like I said, I wanted her to build her own self-trust and increase her own inner validation. So I got her to write what her responsibilities were in her work and what were the responsibilities of her clients. Because sometimes she was going above and beyond. Like I said, she's a really, really hard worker, and she was going above and beyond, but in a way that would lead to burnout, and in a way that was people pleasing. So she was doing it because she thought that that's what she had to do in order to please those people. And so what we needed to do is we still did the work. She still put the work in. She still went above and beyond. But the amount of work that she put in and the way she did it was based on what were her responsibilities. And that became, like I said, it's based on her kind of priorities and her business, but it was like a deeper layer, if you like. It was really looking at what was she responsible for. And there were quite a few things, and some of them were quite actionable things, some of them were my more mindset areas, but there were quite a few where I was like, so you've just done that, and if you look at your list of responsibilities, that isn't on your list, that's on theirs. And so just really interesting to see that, so she could start to have something really cemented in place where she could refer back to and say, actually, that's not my job, that's not what I'm here to do. And something that she could see where she could say, actually, this is something I can ask either somebody else to do, or this is a responsibility of my clients. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. But really coming back to what I was talking about before, when I was saying it's so easy to look for external validation, and it's so easy to want to have somebody tell you exactly what to do, but actually you have so many tools in your arsenal where you can actually, like things like this, where you can look through different lenses and go, no, I know that this isn't my job, or I know that I need to ask so and so, or I need to ask this is actually my client's work. Does that make sense? So that was one of the pieces that we did, and that kind of crossed over with boundaries as well. You know, having those real clear boundaries of this is what I do and this is what they do, and that helped again cement that groundedness for her. It helped with the self-doubt, it helped with the people pleasing, it helped with my reading, but it also helped her to stop looking for that external validation all the time, and actually realize that she was doing well just with what she was doing. And the other thing we did, and I do it every week with every client, is just getting them to reflect on their wins. And my argument here is that the smaller the win, the better. And I know this sounds really like, why? Because if we're always just waiting for the big wins, like the big clients or the big money months, which I know is ironic because we're doing this as a her biggest money month, but the things that lead to those big wins are always the small wins, the small process wins. You know, the in so many of my clients' cases, it's actually doing less better and celebrating that. Like, I did less better this week, fantastic. It's those process wins, those small process wins that actually lead to those big wins. So I always get my clients on a Friday to really reflect on that, and sometimes I lovingly say, I'm sure there's something. Some of them will say there's nothing, and I'm like, I'm sure there's a process, I'm sure there's something you've done this week that you can celebrate. Because those are what leads to those big wins. So that was something else we did as well. So that kind of was the mindset side of things. All of those things I feel really came together to support her to feel more grounded. That's what we wanted to do, because feeling more grounded meant that all of those other things that we've been through were reduced. So the mind reading, the people pleasing, the self-doubt, all of those things were reduced because she was feeling more grounded in what she was doing, and she could see that bridge between where she was now and where she wanted to be. That bridge was clearer. She was already, if you like kind of visuals, she was before she could see herself in the future, but there was no bridge. We created a bridge that you could actually start to see that transformation. And she was starting to walk, if you like it. We'll take it a bit further. She was starting to walk on that bridge and take herself a little bit further and further to that future version of herself. Okay, so the next part was clarity. So this was getting really clear, and this kind of goes over clarity, I feel, goes over mindset and strategy a little bit. So just bear with me here. You will feel that it goes over both. So clarity, the first thing we did was getting really clear on who she actually wanted to work with. And this work came about because, like I said, before the people she was attracting weren't ready to pay or say yes. And we realised that some of the content she was putting out there was geared towards people who were just getting started. And she needed people who had already started and were ready for the next step. So this is great information to know, because this then helped us to lead into the right strategy for us, which we'll come back to. But having, I think this is where coaching comes in so well, having somebody who can look at that with you and go, right, okay, let's take a look at what's been going on so far. Let's take a look at the type of, conversations you've been having, the sales calls that you've been having. Let's look at the content that you've been putting out there. And actually then we can build a picture of, well, actually maybe most of these people that you've been getting calls with aren't right fit clients, because she did have a questionnaire up, but we tweaked the questionnaire, and we'll go over that in a minute, to pre-qualify people, and we really kind of drilled down on how we could make that even better. As I said, the sales calls themselves, she was feeling a little bit, I'm not necessarily, she didn't hate them, but I think there was a kind of a lack of confidence around them. And then on the flip side of things, obviously you had people who were saying no, because the content that she was doing was very geared towards starting out, and we needed those people who had already started out and are ready for that next step. So those were the things that we got really clear about. We also got clear on her boundaries. So I was talking about this earlier, and I just want to come back to this now, especially around pricing and where she wanted to be able to offer something at a reduced price. What would that situation look like, and why did it make sense? So I know a lot of coaches out there would say, you don't reduce your price, or you don't do things for free, you just stay at this. But I think highly sensitives, introverts, we're not created like that. We do like to have flexibility. We do like to be able to offer things where we can. And so one of the things that I got really asked her to do was to get clear around her boundaries around the pricing. Like, if you want to be able to offer something at a reduced price every so often, what does that look like? What do the boundaries around that look like, so that you're not doing it to absolutely everybody, and you're not doing it because of the people pleasing or because you assume that you have to. Let's put something into place here that really kind of protects that, so you can feel good about offering something for free, or feel good about offering for something at a discounted package if that's what you wanted to do. But it was within a container, it was in a boundary, so it's not like just happening willy-nilly wherever she wanted to do it, and then she started resenting it. It was very much in its own container. So we got really clear about that, and I think that really supported her. In all of the situations, what was the pricing she was going to stick to, and why? What was the price that made sense to her? And again, this crossover with the mindset of normalizing getting paid and desiring money, but it was also very actionable in, well, what do you need? So she wanted to leave her part-time job. What do you need? Let's work backwards. How many clients do you want to work? We just did the math. Like, if we had that many clients at that price, would that be enough? Yes or no? Okay, so no, so we need to tweak it. What do we need instead? This is something I think is quite actionable. It's doable. It's not necessarily, obviously the mindset supports that, but this particular part of it is quite kind of straightforward. So actually just working out what she needed, and then with that mindset work about normalizing getting paid and desiring money, that really supported her there. Again, just reiterating what we said before, we also got really clear on what was her responsibility and what wasn't her responsibility, so that she could move forward knowing that she knew exactly what she needed to do and where her energy needed to go, rather than feeling like her energy needed to go everywhere and on everything. She knew, like, this is my job, these are my responsibilities, these are things that I need to do, and these are not. These are the things that I don't need to do. These are not my responsibility, so I don't have to work through these or put my energy on these. It really helped to clear up some of that mind space, but also support her energy levels. Okay, I'm going to move on to strategy, because I'm very much aware of time. So the strategy, so we've gone through mindset and clarity. Strategy, she was also doing a lot of cold DMs, like we spoke about before, and they weren't necessarily getting anywhere. So we looked at other ways. We reverse engineered what was already working and tweaked it. And for her, this was talking to people and getting to know people worked really well for her. So we knew that that was what had already worked so well. She enjoyed her in-person networking events, but she was also aware that she didn't want to burn out. So we decided to keep what she had, but not to add any more. And we then looked at coffee chats. Again, she didn't want to spend all of her time doing these. And so we agreed that she would only do these when someone referred her to them and she didn't know them at all. So and I'm just going to give some clarity and breakdown on this, because what she was doing was she was doing a lot of cold outreach DMs, which weren't necessarily bringing in leads. What we really wanted to do was we wanted to have conversations with people who were already in a place where they were thinking about hiring somebody for her services. So that came down to content, and I'll go through content. That was one of the last things we started to work on. It's something she's built on since then as well. We also wanted to look at the types of people that she was having conversations with. So she just wasn't having conversation for conversation's sake. So coffee chats became something that she had when she didn't know somebody at all. So she hadn't had a conversation with them through the DMs. She may have been referred to them from somebody else. There was a 30-minute coffee chat to actually get to know them. So there was no pressure on selling to them or doing a sales call. It was just a coffee chat, just getting to know that person. And we went over some questions that she could ask to help her, because she liked to be prepared, but it was very much just getting to know that person. That meant then that the sales calls were left for people who were the right fit, the ones that are pre-qualified through her questionnaire, and we'll go over that in a minute, and those people that were ready to say yes. So she wasn't wasting her time on so many different calls trying to think that that person she was going to sell to. She knew going in what the intention was for each course. So the coffee chats were just to get to know people, 30 minutes. The sales calls were for people that she'd already spoken to. They'd already filled out a questionnaire, and they were ready to go to that next step. So that supported her with the overwhelm, because then she wasn't getting on so many calls. I hope that makes sense so far. And like I said, she didn't want to be on a lot of calls. She did have a questionnaire, and some people were filling it out and others weren't. So we tweaked the questionnaire questions so that they were pre-qualifying her leads. And then when she got on calls with the ones that were ready, she knew that she could then talk about her services. And if they weren't ready, and it came through in the questionnaire, she didn't get on a call with them, but she might send them a message or an email to check in with them, like an X amount of weeks or X amount of months, depending on how long they needed. And this is, again, the power of follow-up. So Laura has says, you think you can operate like you did when you had a job, but it doesn't work the same. It doesn't work the same. No, business is so not the same as anything else. So yes, like I said, we really looked at the questionnaire. We looked at making the questions even more just simple, really simple, but also gave her the information that she needed to. So if they were saying yes, they were ready for the next step, then she'd invite them to a sales call. If they were saying no, she would then get in touch with them and say, right, okay, would you like me to get, can I contact you in X amount of months when you might be further along? So that meant that she could keep those sales calls for the ones who had filled out the questionnaire and were the right fit clients, and more importantly, had already said that they were ready. Okay. The last piece is we looked at content, because like I said, we didn't want to do so much cold outreach DM, because that was taking a huge amount of energy. It was draining her, and she wasn't really getting anywhere with it. So what we did is we made sure that her content was speaking to those potential clients who were already in a position to look at the next step. So the language we used, the perspective that we had, was looking at how can we talk to people who have already got this and they're ready to do that. So we introduced polls. She mostly used LinkedIn, and she gets really good kind of traction on polls. So she was using polls and then followed up to these polls as a way to connect people, and that was the way that she replaced her cold DMs. So she did polls, and then she was attracting people rather than her draining her energy and reaching so many people every day. She was doing polls, getting that information, and then following up as a way to connect with that person. And it took so much less time, and it was nicer for her because she was talking to people who already knew a little bit about what she did and were people that were drawn to her rather than her trying to find loads of people. And then the next bit that we did, so as I said, this client is such a hard worker. And the last bit that ties everything together here is that we had to dismantle the idea that hard work equals clients and more money. Again, this is something I think that we've created, or we've been brought up with in society, is that hard work equals success. And it doesn't in business, unfortunately. It is, I find, the more I do this, it is about doing less better. It's about going deeper, not wider. I speak to so many people who go, I'm just going to go onto LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook, and I'm going to go onto TikTok. And I get it, but actually reducing it and going deeper to start off with is so much more powerful, because you understand how one particular platform works incredibly well, and then you can go to the other platforms. But trying to do all of it and not getting enough feedback on any of them isn't going to support you. It's just going to drain you, and you're just going to feel exhausted and frustrated. So we did have to work smarter, not harder. Like we said, we reduced her cold outreach in favour of tweaking her questionnaires and doing those polls on her content, and only inviting people onto sales calls who were ready, so that she was having warmer conversations with people through those polls and those calls. We had to acknowledge that sometimes the old pattern of wanting to work harder was going to pop back up. And so we looked at what she was saying yes to and why. This is an important one, I think, for a lot of us, and it comes back a little bit back to boundaries, in the fact that we end up saying yes to things because we think, oh yeah, that'll be good, and then actually reflecting, well, is that good? So for example, she did like an event where she could have a stall, and I'm trying to say this without trying to give too much away here about what she does, but she went and did this, and she gave up a lot of her time, she took a lot of things there, and when we talked about it, she'd booked it before we started working together, so she did it, and then we had a conversation about it, and she was talking about it. It's like, so were any of your ideal or right fit clients there? And she was like, no, not really. So those are the things that I'm talking about. So why are we saying yes to something? Are we saying yes to something because we think we have to? And I think if you're saying anything or making a decision in a panic or in a rush or feeling like I've got to make this decision now, it's never going to be a balanced decision. It's always going to be one that's fraught with either panic, a lack of safety, thinking that you should have to do this. It's that kind of just hustle mentality. Whereas if you make a decision from a centered, more, okay, let me think about this, or just a let me get my kind of nervous system regulated before I make this decision. So that's kind of where we were coming from when she was saying yes to things. Do I actually, and again, this is where we come back to that lens of her values and her priorities, is this actually in alignment? Is this in alignment with your business? Are we going to find right fit clients here? And if the answer is yes, then great. If it feels good, go for it. But if it is a no to any of those, do you want to be doing it? And actually asking yourself that question. So there is a little bit of boundary work here, but there was definitely an element of just saying yes because she thought that that's what she had to do, and working harder and harder and harder is the way to go. So what else have I got to say here? Yeah. So is this going to support my business to move forward? And if I say yes to this, what do I have to say no to? And am I prepared to do that? And that is kind of one of the mantras that we had. Say, if you say yes to this, what does that mean you have to say no to? And are you happy to say no to that? And sometimes it was a yes and sometimes it was a no. But doing all of these different things really enabled her then to get on with calls. So I think it was after we had that session, I want to say it was about 3 weeks later, she was getting in touch and said, those people that, I've been waiting on, and said yes. And then literally, I think it was a day or 2 days later, she got in touch and said, and I've signed these 2 clients. I've actually had she's had $4,330 a month. And she was just like, I can't believe I've actually done that. So I'm just going to zoom back out now that we've kind of zoomed in into all the details here through that mindset and clarity and strategy. I'm going to zoom back out because I think a lot of people see this and then go, oh, well, that's okay because she's got this or she did this. This was a lady who was getting ghosted and was really frustrated with the fact that she was doing all of this work and not seeing the clients on the other side. And then zoom forward, and she was having people saying yes not just once, but I think she signed about 2 or 3 clients within a couple of days. And that's the difference, is it's being more grounded. And this is why I think this work is so important when you do start a business. Doing the inner work, feeling grounded, knowing yourself, believing in yourself, backing yourself, knowing that you don't know the unknown yet, but you back yourself enough to figure it out is huge. Don't ever underplay that. It's such a big part of it. Well, however you do that, and there are so many ways to get there, but whatever that looks like to you is such a big part of this. Getting really clear and knowing the little bits, like I said, looking at the content, looking at what you're already putting on there. Am I gearing this towards the people who are going to say yes, who do want to take that next step to me? What do they need to hear from me in order to say yes? Those types of questions to help. And then how else can I do outreach? Because I think outreach, whatever way you want to talk about it, whether it's conversations, whether it's emails, whether it's DMs, however you want to do that, outreach is important, but doing it in your own way that feels good is so important. So for a lot of us, doing cold DM outreach is just there. It's just not nice. So how can we do it in a different way? For her, polls worked really well, and then she could contact those people who had voted and have a conversation with them. And like I said, she then had that questionnaire that enabled her to pre-qualify leads, so she was getting those right fit clients rather than people that weren't ready. So I'm hoping that all makes sense. There's so many parts of this, but I'm so happy for her, because I mean, I think the last message she said is, I'm crying it like happy tears. I can't believe this has actually happened. And it is possible. It really is possible for all of us and for you guys to get to that place. Wherever your version of success is, or whatever that looks like to you, it is absolutely possible. But it's not always about doing more work. It is often about getting really strategic. It's often about getting really clear and doing less better. Like I said, going deeper rather than going wider. And if you need any help with this, like I said, I do have one more free spot for the next 6 months. If you would like to go in a 6-month container, I will put a consultation or a discovery call link below, and it is no pressure, honestly. It is just there talking about what it would look like to work together, and if I don't think you'd be a good fit, I will let you know, as hopefully this has kind of really shown those right fit clients are so important, because it makes everything easier. If you're attracting the right fit clients, when you get on a call with them, when you have a conversation with them, it's so much easier on the other side. So I hope that helps. I hope that's useful. I hope you enjoy the sunshine and the heat. I've got fans and windows open everywhere. I'm sending you so much love, guys. Have a wonderful week and take care. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you have any takeaways or any questions, please do reach out to me either through Instagram, LinkedIn or Facebook at Kate Carter Coaching, or you can email me at kate@katecarter.co.uk. I always love to hear your feedback and the things that you have taken from the podcast. If you know of any other highly sensitive people, then please do share this so that I can reach more and support more highly sensitive people to embrace their strengths and gifts. As a thank you, I will pick a winner every month for a free 50-minute coaching session with me. Thank you so much.